Hi and welcome back. In this video, I will continue talking about the basic building blocks in Max. There are more useful basic building blocks. So let me disable this. And yes, the slider. So slider is, as we can all imagine, very useful. By default, it's actually set to the range going from 0 to 127, which for those familiar with MIDI, this will probably look familiar because this is the range of MIDI, and because this is exactly 128 different values that we can get. And as you can see, even though I connected the float number, we are only getting a whole number. It's an integer type of number that we are getting from the slider. Of course, we can change the range of the slider. So one way to do it is to go into the inspector. While this is clicked, we can click the inspector, and we'll see the parameters that are set for the slider. So you can see the range is 128, as I said a second ago, and we can change it to 10, for example. And right now, if I will scroll, you can see it's actually jumping between the whole numbers from 0 to 9, which gives us exactly 10 values. If I want to be in a float domain, then I can actually go into inspector again, check this box, float output, and right now we can do it in floats rather than integers. So graphically, we can also change it from, or use, of course, slider interchangeably with the dial, which works in a similar way, except that this will actually be a dial. And again, I can just click it and drag it up and down, and you can see how the value is changing. Again, those are integers, but we can go here in the inspector and check this box or change the value or go into the float range. And there's one more slider that's very specific use case for it. It's called Kslider, because also we can open it this way. So this is basically a keyboard, a MIDI keyboard that will send values for a MIDI note and for the velocity. Since this is on screen, then we cannot have a velocity on our mouse press, but if we press it down here, the velocity will be smaller. That will be represented by a small number, and here it will be represented by the highest number. We can see how the velocity changes. When I connect it to output, you can see that now the velocity is higher and it's getting smaller as I click it lower within the window. And of course, on the left, we have the MIDI note number. And we can change how many octaves do we have on screen, or what's the actual octave that we start from and end up on. It's all here in the inspector. But for now, it's just, like I said, the lowest MIDI key and the number of notes on the keyboard. But let's just be aware of existence of this object, and we'll get to use it later on as we progress with this series of tutorials. There is another useful slider, and this is the slider that's by default is within the range from -1 to +1. And you can see that I can actually click it and it will jump to this value, and it will not send a value unless I release it. But it's actually quite useful to display the number. You can change its size. So you can connect it, change the value here for the slider so that it's actually from -1 to 1, and the output is in float. So right now this is sorry, the range should be 2, of course, and this is literally just making this slider bigger. But we can also do this cool thing with it, because if we go into its inspector and we change the slider style into point scroll, we can use it like a history for the slider. Like what was the value that it was set to before. We can make it equal size. So right now, if I move the slider, we can see how the value changes in time, which may come handy as we are working with values in Max. And another cool thing that we could do with it is to display, because this is just sending single value, but we can also display list of values, because I can do 0.25, 0.5, 0.75, 1, and minus 0.25. This is a list of values, and I'll also explain how it works in the next video, but for now you have to trust me on this one. And if I click it, sorry, I forgot to change the mode. Not this one, thin line. So you can see it's actually displaying each value as a separate bar. Well, actually this is a thin line. We can set it to bar display. Oh, there you go. It's easier to see right now. And of course, if I were to change those values and trigger the send message by clicking it, this will change. So we can use it as like a multi-slider, depending on how many values we send to it. We can also set it manually with this inspector here with the number of slider value. And of course, we can change the range. We don't have to stay in -1, +1. So it's quite versatile, this object. There's also this group of objects that look nice and behave in a useful way. This group is called Max for Live objects, because they are actually used in Ableton Live. When you're doing an Ableton Live device, this is the type of controls that you can actually be familiar with from Ableton Live. And so, for example, this is the dial, the style of dial. So you can see it works pretty much similar to the regular dial. It just looks different, but it also has this cool second output, which is always scaled to 0, 1. And this is the actual value. So again, by default, it's set to go from 0 to 127. And this can come handy at times. What I also like to use is the Live.gain, which is quite useful because we can use it as a volume control. And we can also display the audio signal. You can see it what the audio level is of the output. Sorry. Yeah, and you will definitely see me using this quite a lot. I mean, probably at the very end of the audio chain in almost every single file that I will create. And again, two more very useful objects when we are working with audio. One is the audio input, and the second one is the audio output. So this one is called ezadc, and this one is called ezdac. Of course, we can just do it like this. Yes, there it is. So what we will usually do is, sorry, let me delete this one. Yes, so what we will usually do is connect the outputs of the patch, and we have a Live.gain before the actual output to have a visual feedback if there is a signal or not, and have some audio control. before going to the actual output in our computer. And that's it for the building blocks, for the basic building blocks. Of course, there will be more as we go further, but these are the very basics, and I think all of those will come handy in different when going through different examples in different patches.